Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Genser, and thank you so much for joining today's conversation, Talent Fluidity, Transforming Your Workforce from Within. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Everyone is on mute and will remain on mute for the duration of the conversation. However, we have saved time at the end to take your questions. So as we're going through, if something occurs to you, pop it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to everybody in the time we have allotted. Today's session is being recorded. We will send out a replay as well as any slides and any research that we discuss. We will send links to that. Without further ado, let me hand it over to my colleague Sabina to get us started.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome everyone to our LHH and General Assembly webinar. I'm Sabina Gajoli, and I have the absolute pleasure of working with amazing customers here and all around the world. And that's because at LHH, we help support employees and organizations through every stage of that employee life cycle. And it starts from recruitment to leadership development, career mobility, upskilling, coaching, and career transition. I am thrilled to be here today with two esteemed industry leaders, Laura Sanchez and Nicole Starling. I'd love for you both to introduce yourselves. Laura, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, no problem. So hi, everyone. My name is Laura Sanchez. I currently work for Toyota Motor North America. I've been with the company for 12 years. I actually started as an intern in 2012. And since then, I've been moving around the company in a very awesome and deliberate way. So I've started off in our manufacturing plant where we built the Tundra and the Tacoma. And I have then moved, and I worked in HR there. I worked in team member relations, which is like employee relations, known more broadly. From there, I moved to our headquarters office, which is where I currently am right now. So it's Toyota Motor North America. And I transitioned into a project management role. So where I see the life cycle and project manage the life cycle of the vehicle from the very first design phase all the way to production at the manufacturing plant. So that was a pretty awesome experience. I have also had the opportunity to go back into TD. So that's where I am now, but talent development, I went back in 2019 and specifically I supported a lot of the succession planning process. Then I moved out of HR into Toyota Financial Services, so the financial services side of the company. And I just came back from an expat assignment with TFS where I went to Japan for 2 years. And in July, I've just recently been back to the talent development world. So I went from TFS back to HR and TD. And so that's currently where I am. And I say that because the topic today is talent fluidity. And I just feel like that resonates a lot with my personal career. And it's something that I'm really passionate about. So I'm just so excited that I'm here today to talk about our Toyota internal mobility that we've done with our company. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for the great intro. Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Starling, and I work at Prudential. I'm in the technology and data chief operating office. I'm responsible for leading learning, and that includes agile learning, leadership, and technical skills learning capabilities. I've been at Prudential a little over 4 years now. And prior to Prudential, I worked at Freddie Mac, Bank of America, UBS, and I had a career in management consulting. I've been very lucky in that I've had a very diverse career that includes project management, change management, strategy, chief of staff, learning, communications, did I say strategy? So many different things. And I'm really, really happy to be here today to talk about what we've been doing at Prudential and how we've approached our mobility.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole, for the great intro. And thank you both. I can't wait to delve into our conversation. Before we do, I think it's important to level set what we mean by talent fluidity. And what we're talking about here is the adaptable movement of an employee within an organization. It can include gaining competencies. It's also referred to as employee mobility, most commonly used, right? And so we're going to discuss why it's important to have within our organization. What can we do to get an internal program started, and how can we continuously improve upon it? So when we talk about employee mobility, it doesn't necessarily mean a promotion. I know that's the first thing a lot of people think about, but what we're talking about here specifically is providing employees an opportunity outside of their core responsibilities to allow them to grow. And so here's some examples, right? It could be taking on new assignments to expand skill sets, could be gig work, it could be temporary assignments, it could, that help fill the gap, upskilling, reskilling, or taking on assignments overseas, like we just heard Laura say. So the point here is to think beyond the promotion, and that mindset really needs to come from the organization. And the next slide will show us why it's so important that we're having this conversation. Are our employees prepared to face the next challenge? I think we've already been through so much in the last 4 years. And it just feels like the challenges keep coming at us. Disruption is happening at every level within the organizations. AI is hitting every knowledge worker. Do we have the right skills for the future? And I actually want to just take a moment and pause here to address even the recent hurricanes and the storms that have devastated families and communities. Our thoughts are with them all. And we can see firsthand how these situations can wreak havoc, displacing people, not just from their jobs, but also from their workplace. And a lot of the times they're not able to get back to work. So the question here is, do organizations have the right employee mobility infrastructure in place to be able to be agile when they're faced with these challenges? Now, let's take a look at the recent survey that LHH conducted. Our research solidifies why implementing a strategy in a program is crucial. Here are some of the top reasons why employees leave and why they stay. Now, there's really nothing we can do about the financial reasons. That's going to be a separate topic for a different day. But what we can see is some common denominators. And we see here that people leave when they want to learn new skills and they're not getting them internally, or they want to change, typically maybe change doing different things. And so some big reasons onto the other column that we see why they stay is they want a culture that values their career and their skill development. So those are some big ones that we see. Again, those top ones, another topic for different discussion. So now we'd like to ask you all a question. Who do you think is responsible for employee development? We've launched a poll, and if you can please get that started, please answer whatever comes top of mind. Is it the employee? Are they responsible for it? Is it the manager? Is it the company, or other? Other, it's hard, so I know it's in there, but it's hard to quantify the other. Okay, see that they're coming in. 71% are participating so far. They're coming in fast and furious. Wow. Okay. So it looks like, let's just see here, give it another second or so because I'm not sure that we got all of our responses. Okay. So I think we're gonna stop the poll now, and it looks like 59% think it's up to the employee themselves. Wow, we've got an independent bunch here. And then we see that 10% think it's the employee's manager, 15% think it's the company, and then 16% think it's other. Thank you all for responding to our poll. Now, let's take a look at what, I'll stop the poll because it's, okay. Hang on a second. Okay, great. So let's see now what our survey showed. And keep in mind that we surveyed across 9 countries. And so when we take a look from our LHH research, these were the results that showed up. Half of them think that their manager or organization has a responsibility to keep them educated and skilled. Now, seems like not everyone's going to agree here from the audience, but this is what our data produced from our survey. And now, if you're shocked by this data, wait till you see the next slide. So we'll turn to the next slide. 64% of the employees that we surveyed said that their organization should upskill internally first before hiring anyone from the outside. Again, that's 64% feel that organizations have the responsibility to skill internally before. Now, let's look at the other statistics. 8% of employees use internal platforms when looking for new positions. Only 8% are looking at internal platforms, while almost half are looking at external platforms. So this begs the question, why are almost half looking externally? Because that's a huge number. So let's look at the next slide. It's going to give us one reason why they are. One of the top reasons were talent hoarding. And if you haven't heard of this term, you will. We're going to talk a little bit more about this as well. So who amongst us want to give up good people on our team? Well, not many. And nearly half of the workers feel that their managers don't really support them moving internally, hence why they're looking for external opportunities. So what we see in the data is that people on the top of the chain are getting support. Look at the leaders here, while some of the other positions, not so much. So this is why mobility makes it hard. And this, again, is just one of the reasons why it's hard. It's not just a portal, it's a process. And with that introduction as to why it's important, I'm going to now turn it to Nicole and Laura to learn a little bit more about their successful programs. So we would love to hear your unique approaches to employee mobility. Nicole, can you start with a brief overview of what that looks like in your organization?
Absolutely. I think I'd want to start with, you can invest in your people and help advance their careers while advancing the company's vision and strategy ultimately. So that's why for us, it really started with an integrated workforce strategy that's tied to both our organizational and our company goals. Our strategy is comprehensive. It considers talent mobility, talent acquisition, upskilling and reskilling, and our strategic partnerships, and then ultimately using these as levers to help us achieve our goals.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Laura.
Mhm. Yeah, I can share. Our journey really started 8 years ago with a former CEO. So I think many of you may be aware that Toyota, we relocated our 3 headquarters. So we had our sales, manufacturing, and finance in different locations. And we physically moved to Plano, Texas. So that is where we all are now. And one of the things that our former CEO used to say all the time was, the physical change is not, like, physically changing locations is not the most important thing. The most important thing is the mindset of One Toyota. We are making decisions for the best of the entire company holistically, not just looking individually, but as a whole. Like, how can we better support the company looking as a whole? And I think when you mentioned talent hoarding, that is something that when we were delivering the message from an HR standpoint of even our talent, like not hoarding our talent, thinking of talent from manufacturing, sales, and finance as a whole. And if these members have the skills and the capabilities to support in a different area, then allowing them to do so. So it's been very much focused on a mindset shift. And it started 8 years ago, and within HR, kind of reiterating that message specifically when it comes to talent.
Great, thank you so much. And I think the audience would love to know, what was the impetus for starting down this path, right? What were some of the key moments that made your organization think about starting this program? Nicole, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think, I work in technology and data. So I think, we all know how rapidly technology changes and how, competitive that marketplace is for talent ultimately. So you have to do more than just keep up. You have to go beyond what's expected, and like just keeping up is really, that's table stakes in the end. So we knew that we really needed to provide our team members with the tools, the skills, and the mobility opportunities to help them succeed. We believe in our people. Ultimately, we know that their success is our success. But I also want to kind of latch on to, what some of the things that Laura said. Ultimately, a lot of times, like leaders aren't really incentivized to encourage mobility. And I think we all know that how you measure people drives behavior. And if they're not measured on that, then there's no benefit to them doing it ultimately. They don't see the benefit immediately.
It's so true. And sometimes I think managers get penalized if employees,
Hmm.
right? And so it's almost looked frowned upon. So thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about maybe the process of starting the program, because that's, I think, the difficult part. How do you get started? Let's start with that. We'll follow up with others.
Mhm. Yeah, I can take that. I can start off with that. So I think from the Toyota side, again, very similar to our mindset thinking is our philosophy. So within our company, we have a philosophy that we call the 3 E's. So it's the experience, education, and experience, exposure, and education. So the experience portion is what we call 70% of a member's development should come from the experience piece. For exposure, which is like interacting with other people, like mentoring, for example, sponsoring, that would fall under the exposure side. And then lastly, the education component is a 10%. So we adopted this philosophy around the same time that we had the One Toyota initiative come together. And so what this is very helpful and practical for our processes is that we constantly remind the business if they ever come to HR for specifically education, because I think a lot of the time when they come to talent development, they think of like, well, what's the training or what's the education that is going to be shared with us? But in this way, we remind them of the experience portion being the main way that team members learn and develop, and then that exposure side as well. And that the 10%, actually the education, the formal training is the least amount, which is the 10%. So in this way, we keep reiterating to them that their experience, so getting those stretch assignments, going on expat assignment like for myself, or even joining our ERGs, so our employee resource groups, they provide so much learning from a team member from a leadership standpoint. They also provide them networking amongst each other, so that hits really the experience and the exposure piece as well. So at the same time that we're doing this philosophy of the 3 E's, we're also simultaneously tackling our HR processes. So from a TD side, those processes are like performance management. Then we also have succession planning and also like talent marketplace. So we, as you all may know, like Toyota is so process oriented. So what we do is we really look at the process. We try to Kaizen it, which is just a Toyota way to say we improve it. So there's ways that we improve it. We gain consensus, which is also very much part of our Toyota culture, which is nemawashi, ensuring all the right stakeholders are involved before we automate. So this is very important, and this is something that Toyota does very well in that part of the let's do our processes, let's nemawashi, let's improve them, and then let's automate. Because if we were to automate without having done the steps, we can kind of create a bigger issue for us. So we keep that in mind, kind of simultaneously tackling mindset at the same time as our HR processes.
Great. Thank you so much. Nicole?
Yeah. Yeah, for us, it was kind of almost a complete overhaul of how we look at talent. And in the end, our first step was really understanding our current state so that we could develop that approach to help us close the identified gaps to our goals ultimately. This is where I go back to like my kind of management consulting, kind of mindset. That's a detailed analysis. We did a detailed current state analysis. It was collaboration between our HR, our talent, our compensation, and our leadership teams ultimately. All of these things tied together. This involved looking at our job architecture. And that's where we really started, was with our job architecture. We simplified it considerably, defining clear skills, mobility recommendations for each role, and then learning tied to each of those roles so that it could help our team members ultimately achieve their goals. End to end, this whole kind of approach of kind of at least coming up with this strategy took probably about 6 months. And we are still in the implementation of it ultimately.
Okay, so that's interesting. So when you said that
Hmm.
it was a complete overhaul from a timeline perspective,
Mm.
would you say it was 6 month time frame from inception?
Um, we are probably about a year and a half into it now, really.
Okay.
We started with the job architecture. We released that job architecture. We released the learning opportunities and our own talent marketplace, explaining to people how these roles are connected and the skills that you need for each role. I'd say that, like I said, I don't think it really ends, right? Because you have to keep maintaining that, and there are always changes. I work in technology again, so generative AI has been like a new game changer for us ultimately. That has to be added to our job architecture to specific roles, right? How we look at those roles now changes as technology changes.
100%, 100%. And Laura, can you share a little bit about the timeline from your standpoint?
Mhm. I think for us, it's been, like I said, from the mindset, it has been like the 8 years. So I know it sounds like a lot. It sounds like it's been such a long time, but you know, um, we've been going down the path of ensuring that our systems, no, sorry, not systems, our processes are set up correctly. So we've been tackling each process within the last 8 years, kind of focusing on performance management first, then our succession planning process, and then the talent marketplace. So in a lot of ways, it's like building the blocks to eventually be able to create something that's automated that the data can be used with those other processes that have been established. So it's been 8 years in the making. So 8 years in the making, but again, like tackling and ensuring that we have a good quality product at the end of it.
Yeah, that's great. And 8 years is not that bad because it talks to because it's a continuous thing,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
In talking to one of our tech customer, they were saying where it's been a 10-year process.
mhm,
And just when you think you have it set,
mhm,
it
mhm.
changes again. It's just constantly changing from that whole, standpoint of workforce mobility. And so it is just constantly evolving, constantly changing, and we've got to change with it. So thank you both. Why do I know you've touched on it? I think it's a good time now to maybe delve a little bit deeper. And Laura, you talked about Toyota's approach about the whole
Mhm,
mindset, right? And
mhm,
um, And also when we started, we talked about talent hoarding, right? And
Mm,
that's a big one, which really makes it difficult for the employee
mhm,
to move or to raise their hand, right?
right.
Because they be penalized. If they're interested in a
Mhm,
role or interested in doing something, are they going to look frowned upon where all of a sudden now their manager's like, what, you want to leave, or what, you want to try something different? Are
mhm,
you not happy here? So how did Toyota overcome some of these, relatable issues with
mhm.
managers not wanting to let go of their talent?
Yeah, I think Toyota's culture, maybe other companies as well, may be the same, but it's very data driven.
Mhm.
So we have had so much industry data that has come out, just like the one you shared earlier today, where we make sure to share that with our management team so that they understand it's not just our gut feeling or our assumption of certain things, but there's actually a lot of data out there that is supporting. And if there's any data internally that we can also share, for example, if there's exit interviews and what is the reason for those exit interviews, and if they tie anything to internal mobility, like those are the type of things that can catch a lot of attention, and it's data driven. It's not like you can argue with it or say something differently. So I think for us, that has been very successful, just sharing the information and highlighting it as much as possible. And it's just a constant reminder. We are still working through it to avoid the talent hoarding, but it's always going to be a work in progress. We also have a lot of new people leaders. So as people get, promoted, like it's continuing that message and sharing with them and reminding them of ultimately that one Toyota mindset that includes their talent as well.
Yeah, that's great. And you also talked about the 3 E's
Mhm, mhm,
model
mhm,
that Toyota has implemented, and I love it. The
mhm,
experience, exposure, education.
mhm,
So if you can maybe delve a little bit deeper,
mhm,
how does Toyota,
mhm.
practically apply this framework to help support the employees from a development stage to just a mobility standpoint as well?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that, even personally for my career, that I have been very empowered and enabled from the very beginning was to own my own development. So you've seen, and when I kind of shared it at the very beginning, I said I've been fortunate but deliberate. It's been intentional. And I've been very fortunate to have great managers, great leaders, great supporters, great mentors, great sponsors that I have shared my career development plan with. And that's another thing that we at Toyota ask team members to do, which is update your career development plan, to have those conversations with your management team. But at the end of the day, you're owning your own development because no one knows where you want to go but you. So that's kind of the advice and the push and the empowerment that we try to give our team members. Just as myself, when I had a general manager from HR tell this to me directly, I felt very empowered. And I felt like I'm owning my own development. What can I do? Where do I want to go? What are my interests? What are the skills that I want to develop and strengthen? So I took that very much to heart. And I feel like the company, like whenever we have the opportunity, for example, to talk to our employees resource groups, yes, the manager is part of the ecosystem and the tools that the company has is part of the ecosystem to make that happen. But at the end of the day, like the team members should own where they want to go. So that's one of the messages that, especially coming from manufacturing, like that we were very strong about letting team members know you own your own development. So what do you want? And then how can we help you get there?
Yeah, so true. And I remember years and years ago having the opportunity to relocate. I know you've been
Mhm,
overseas, and
mhm,
for me, it was from Canada to the US. It was a big change, but I
mhm,
raised my hand and
mhm,
I had that opportunity. And sometimes those opportunities come, but it's crucial that we
mhm,
own
mhm,
it, as you said,
mhm,
and Nicole as
mhm,
well. And
Yeah.
good to put our hand. Nicole, did you want to add to that?
mhm,
Yeah, it's very similar at Prudential. We really stress that to all our team members that they own their careers. But one of the things that we've realized is that leaders don't know how to facilitate that for their team members. So one of the things that we've started doing is having coaching circles specifically for our leaders so they can learn from each other about how to be better leaders and help their team members really focus on their careers and how to help facilitate those conversations with them. Because like I said, a lot of times if they don't know how to do that, and I think they can get tips and tricks from each other, and that's what they do in these coaching circles ultimately. So, it's a coaching circle that's less about their kind of personal development, but more about how do you be a better leader to your team members so that they can focus on their growth and development.
Yeah, well said. And I'm a huge proponent of the coaching bit because I think everybody needs, depending on the stage where they're at from a leadership standpoint, but even employees, the coaching really helps push forward. So thank you. Thank you for that. Nicole, want to turn a little bit over to you to get some more specifics about the program in place, right? Skills we know are constantly changing. What we needed 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, are probably not going to be what we need today or the future. So how was Prudential able to identify some of those key skills that were necessary to be part of your transformation?
Yeah, we really started with identifying the skill gaps for all of our team members. And when I say all of our team members, I mean all of our team members. The leaders really looked and did a structured analysis of their skill sets and compared that to the skill sets that we need in the future, right? And armed with those skill gaps, we could see patterns. We could see themes emerging across the organization, I would say, particularly around engineering skills. Um, Now, like you said, these skills are always changing. Great thing is like, full stack development skills are still things that we need in a technology and data organization. But I mentioned like generative AI. And as that changes, we have a very responsible, what I'm going to say, a very responsive kind of governance framework around looking at our skills and our job architecture so that we keep it current. And then where we see those gaps, we're responsive to develop the upskilling programs to do that. So to point, we just launched an upskilling program for our chief data office, particularly around generative AI skills. That is being responsive to the need right now. This is meanwhile while we're still running a program for our software engineering skills ultimately, and that program has been in place for over a year and a half now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And can you share a little bit more about that particular program and how has it been impactful for your organization?
Yep. So for that program, our academies, we did a combination of curated on-demand learning paths, and then we also designed specific training academies with our partner General Assembly on this. And the academy programs are 4 to 5 weeks. Like we are dedicated to their learning, and we know that especially for these types of skills, you can't just always just buy them in the market, like, and we don't want to because we value our people. We know that they have the aptitude and the interest to be upskilled, and so we've been focusing on that for over a year now. These programs are built in combination with our strategic partner, but also our leadership team and our subject matter experts. So it's really contextualized for our needs ultimately, for our tech stack ultimately. And then I would say, with that, like we've seen it be incredibly successful, both from a sentiment perspective, the confidence of the participants that go through the program, and also we see it in the way that they work. And we see it because we actually do pre and post testing on the skills. We see it in the proficiency gains.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you shared with us everything that went well. Is there anything maybe that didn't go well, or as you had planned and you had to maybe pivot?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to look at it as like it doesn't go well. I think you always have to have a growth mindset when you're building these types of programs and be willing to test and learn, right? And make pivots along the way when you need to. I'll share with you that like we make pivots all the time, even if they're like little micro pivots based on the direct feedback from the participants. But when we first started, like anything else, we started with a pilot. And what we realized from that pilot is that it was too much information in too short a time, and that it was not a great learning experience. And that might have hurt. That took 3 months to realize that, but that's why you test and learn. And then we developed a program now that has like an NPS of 90. So we couldn't be happier ultimately. It's best in class.
Wow. And so that's amazing. And you shared a little bit about how you measure success. Are there other ways that you do measure success based on your initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. Those, I shared a little bit about proficiency, their confidence, how they work together, and that's kind of observed by leaders, and those changes. But in the end, we have like very specific measurements that are tied to our workforce strategy. We have both mobility metrics. We're expecting people to move around after the training. We expect them to move around, I'd say, roughly within 6 months and kind of make it to the target state job family of where we really want them to be. And we're seeing that, happen where we're looking at maybe 25%, 26% each mobility cycle are making that movement. So we know that the program ultimately is working in the sense that the learning is working, but it's also that partnership with the leaders. And one of the things that we do is we show the leaders that data, and Laura talked about data before, we show the leaders that data directly by their area, not just at the top level, but we start getting down into like the layers of leaders so that they see their data so that they can really take that ownership of that and helping their team members. Because as you know, it's not enough to just learn the skills, you have to demonstrate them. And the leaders have to give them the assignments and the work to help them demonstrate those skills so that they can achieve that mobility.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Nicole. And Laura, I know you've had a lot of effort put into your programs and things like that. What's sort of the feedback that you're getting from that?
Yeah, we get positive feedback. I don't have the specific data to share right now, but we have continued because a lot of our programs start with like a pilot effort. So if the pilot doesn't do well, we don't continue it. We've been very fortunate that the pilots have done well, and that afterwards, when we survey our members of the experience that they've had, and then also we have internal, just like Nicole was mentioning, we also have internal metrics that we measure them for, promotion, retention, moves, like internal mobility moves, etc. So if we see a good pilot with good results, then it moves on to becoming not a pilot, but an official program that we offer to everyone. But just to kind of reiterate, our programs focus a lot on the experience and the exposure part. They have some educational components as well, but kind of going back to our philosophy, we really try to integrate that experience and exposure piece as well, so that it's not just about the education or the training specifically. And then that's how we also are able to track through the other metrics, like how we're doing.
Mhm. Great. And do either of you have any suggestions, right? So there's people in the audience that are going to start from the beginning and start their process. Is there anything that you can share?
Yeah, I would say I have a few things for you. Don't underestimate how much change management and communications it takes for these types of programs. You need to take people along on the journey, and that requires very consistent communications along the way with the same messaging over and over and over again for them to really start to internalize what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it impacts them. The other thing I would say is that you have to have sponsorship at the very start. There is a difference between support and sponsorship. Your sponsorship really means that there is an accountability there, right? And I was very lucky with our programs that we had the sponsorship at the start. Our leaders have been deeply engaged and they continue to be deeply engaged. They see it as their accountability. So I think that in order to have a successful program, you really have to have that sponsorship at the start.
Mhm. I agree with Nicole, everything that Nicole has just mentioned. I would say just one thing to add is that a steady pace is still forward movement. So I know I've mentioned, like, with our kind of history, it's been 8 years in the making and we're slowly ramping up and we still have work that we're going to be doing. But just reminding, especially within HR, you mentioned it earlier, but we get so many things, external things that get thrown at us that we cannot control. And sometimes, there could be budget cuts or there could be whatever the case may be. Just reminding that a steady pace is still forward movement. And I understand, it could get frustrating and it could feel like we're not moving along. But within that time, it's like pivoting to what is within our control. So if we can't launch that shiny new thing that we were hoping to do, then could it be that we focus on our processes again, like talking about, really kaizening it, really improving them? If it's not that, can we work on our strategies? Is there a new strategy that we've always wanted to do but have never had time? So then pivoting to that. So always trying to figure out how can we still move forward despite all of the turbulence that could be externally or internally with reorgs or whatever it could be. Like, how can we still have a steady movement forward? That's also very much of a Toyota culture where as long as we're moving steadily, we're still moving forward.
I agree. And I love both of your suggestions. I think a lot of organizations and employees feel like maybe they've tried in the past and they failed, so they're nervous to start it up again. Are there some pitfalls that you can talk through to help them avoid maybe some of these pitfalls?
I think from my side, I know I touched on it a little bit, but it's about moving to system automation too quickly. So if the process is already, or the process is kind of unknown or vague, and then you're trying to, because we're trying to upscale, let's move it into automation. And so it's very rushed. At the end of the day, what's going to come out is not a good quality product. So I think that sometimes it's like that shiny new thing, which is automation or upscaling or whatever it could be. It's just being very thorough with the process before it's actually automated. And I think sometimes there could be a lot of pitfalls that come from that, like just moving too quickly. And then now there's a great, awesome system, but it's very frustrating to use because the process isn't set up right, or even the governance, because the system is one thing, but then there should be a governance of how to use it and how to roll that out and how to communicate it. So if that's not taken care of, then it could be very frustrating for the users.
Mm-hmm. Nicole, I know you had talked about sort of starting over, right? Revamping the program. And so
that's it. It's that agility in the end.
Right.
That is like, of course, bad things are going to happen, but I think it's about how you handle those bad things. There are going to be pitfalls, and you may not avoid all of them. So I think being able to operate with agility and just being willing to pivot and having that be an accepted part of your culture, that yes, that didn't go well. All right, let's change it, and we've learned from this, and this is what we're going to do now. Like, that has to be a part of your culture ultimately, that kind of test and learn mentality. And it is at Prudential, and I think that if you can start to have that type of mentality, the pitfalls, I don't want to say that they don't matter, they're just things that you learn from.
Right. Thank you so much. This was very rich information, and I'd like to turn it over to Q&A now, and have you both help maybe answer some questions from the audience. I do know that some questions had come in before when we did set out the webinar invitations, and we hope that we were able to help answer most of those questions. But one that kept coming up, and so I'd like to touch on it again, was, this is a big one, right? What do we do if we can't get the buy-in from senior leadership? What can we do? I have some thoughts around it, but I'll let you both go first.
Yeah, I would say, you have to talk their language, is what I'm going to say to you, right? So if you can put what you're trying to do in the terms that senior leaders really care about, ultimately the bottom line. How is it advancing our strategy? How is this helping our customers? This is what our senior leaders, this is what they worry about day in and day out. How is it helping our company grow? So when you can put the things that you're doing into how it affects the bottom line, how it's helping our company grow, you're going to get them listening.
I love it. I love it. Laura.
Yeah, I think from my side, one thing that we found very effective is grassroots efforts. So sometimes HR is the one that's waving the flag of development, like, we need to develop people. It's so important. But sometimes it's very good for executives to hear it directly from the team members. So we have had a lot of success with our internal innovation fairs. So they get like first place, second place, third place, and really not even if they were placed, but just the ideas that come out. And their executives are the ones who go through each table and hear and understand what the team members are needing. And we had, for example, 3 years ago, one team that came up with workplace internal mobility. That was their idea. This was 3 years ago. So it's like those type of activities, it's grassroots. Like it is not HR pushing and advocating and being at the top of the mountain saying we should develop others. It is the people. Like, what do they want? And they have some really cool, innovative ideas. And I think it's also very empowering to them that they can make change. And in our internal innovation fairs, like they do get like a budgeted allowed for those like very top winners. So it's just a different way. So kind of when we in TD hear about these innovative ideas, we're like, oh, let's use them as an example when we go back and we're asking for budget, even if they didn't win first place, but let's say they came in second, third, or didn't place at all, but they were very popular amongst like the stopping points and it raised a lot of support, then we can use that to kind of showcase like, hey, there's others, not just us, but it's from the team members themselves that are wanting this. So it's very helpful. It's been very helpful for us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of organizations kind of push it to HR. And we heard it from Nicole herself, right? She is part of the technology team and needed this. And so I think if we can demonstrate how that internal mobility really aligns with the organization's strategic objective, that will tackle one of the issues, right? And so maybe tying it to some of the business challenges, right? So talent retention, skills gap, employee engagement. I think a big one too is showing the data, right? I think a lot of the leadership wants to know what's the ROI, right? If we do stand up an internal mobility program. And so maybe being able to show them a little bit about the metrics, like would reduce hiring costs, faster time to productivity, improved employee satisfaction scores. And I know you've both done this. If you wanted to share a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, I would add to what you just said, for us as a technology organization, a decreased reliance on consultants with specialty skills. If we have those skills ourselves, I don't have to pay top dollar for a consultant that has them, right? So, if you can show them, like I said, talk their language a little bit more, if you can show the executive leaders, we're reducing costs by doing this through this investment in our people, you're reducing costs overall long term. Like I said, then you start to get the sponsorship.
100%. And you're a big advocate, and you've said that throughout the conversation. So that is huge. Laura, anything else maybe you wanted to add to that? I know you've thought about it too.
Yeah. No, I agree with Nicole. I think not even from a Toyota perspective, but just industry wide, we all know that labor cost is one of the most expensive costs that a company has to expense. So I think if we can tie it to that specifically, like we're all in the same boat, like that is for most companies the most expensive thing. So I think if we can tie it to that and show the ROI, that would be so helpful. Now it's just going through and linking it that sometimes is pretty tricky. But I think if, you persevere, get the right people in the room, that it could happen. Like we could do that. It's going to take working together with different parts, just depending how big your HR group is, but working with different areas.
Agreed. And we talked about this and want to reiterate it again. Start small, right? Small scale pilot programs. You've talked about that, and you demonstrate the benefits of it, and then help build your case, right? To broader implement. You've both mentioned that. So I think that's another huge thing. So we are opening up for Q&A. Let me take a quick look. If you haven't already put in your questions, please do so. Okay, so someone is asking, okay, so Laura, you mentioned exit interviews, and that do either of your organization use stay or experience interviews to gain insight into why people love your companies or why they decide to leave? It's an interesting question.
I am not sure if I know of the stay and experience piece, but I do know that we ask not just one question, but maybe 30 questions. And then we can see why people, like we have our, we know why they leave. And then at the same time, we also have our internal survey that we do from all of our team members. And we know where our highest ranking answers are from. So I think we have both, like the exit and also the internal one. So we do have one, I think within our company, we call it the TME survey. So we are able to look at the information at a very high level, and then we break it down and break it down and break it down and break it down. I think the most you can break it down is to someone who has up to 10 reports. So we can really like filter down the data. So we do have, I don't know if it's stay or experience, but we do have reports both on the exit interview side and also annual surveys that we do for our team members so that we can gauge their engagement and the things that they love about the company and the things that we need to work on.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Very similar here at Prudential. I don't have any insight into the stay piece, but very similar. We have an annual, we call ours an EQ survey. And we use that survey very similarly. We can break that down to team members who have 5 direct reports actually. So can be even smaller. I actually just had the conversation with my team yesterday about our results and my leadership team about our results and how we would address the things that we could cover, because it covers both from a company perspective, but it also covers from our team perspective as well, so that we can develop actions around it. And we're expected to develop actions around it to address any of the opportunity areas. And I think every leader has that expectation on them, and it's something that we're ultimately measured on.
Great, thank you. And I know there's another question here. And Nicole, maybe you can take this one. How important are assessments and skills mapping to your organization's approach to be able to upskill?
Yeah, we do start with skill assessments. We use a very specific tool to help us with that. We use it before and after so that we can actually see the proficiency growth in our team members ultimately. It's something that's more for them. It's not for us ultimately. I obviously track the metrics because I want to see how we're doing. But that measurement and I'll say this, the exact score of that measurement is only known to them. It's not known to us. We only see that they're moving in certain quintiles. And it's
Okay,
a very important part of the process ultimately. I think that it helps us in terms of tracking our goals so that we know we have a successful program. It's one of the inputs so that we know that we have a successful program. But I think it helps the people in that sense of accomplishment. It means a lot to people when they can say, I started, as like a novice in something. And now look, I am above average in this skill set. And then they start demonstrating those skills to their leader. It's a sense of accomplishment. It feels good, ultimately. So it's a very important part of the program in the end.
Great. And we've got another question here that when a large skills gap has been identified,
Mm,
what is your process to assess the scope of
mm,
impact and then be able to pivot and develop programs?
mm. So, we use like the skill gaps ultimately to kind of be the kind of feeder into the program. Like when I decided to both curate learning to help develop the skill gaps, or whether to buy a solution ultimately, right? It depended on how big that skill gap is. And when the skill gap was like smallish, I was like, you know what, that can be handled with on-demand learning. So this group of people, their focus is really going to be on-demand learning. When I see that, like, oh gosh, like this skill gap that I'm looking at is really large, like we're kind of getting into the more reskilling category, that's when I knew that we needed in the end an academy program that was weeks long, where their sole job during that 4 to 5 week period is to simply learn, because I knew I could see how big the skill gap was. So like that was a combination of using both the skill assessment, but also using their confidence results, right? They would take a pre and post confidence survey as well about how confident they are with certain, skills. So like people have to turn the mirror on themselves. Like, when you don't know something, and it's not going to benefit you to say like you know something that you don't really know, right? We're dealing with adults here. Like they're going to know this. So in the end, we use that, and then when we have that information, we make that determination about, for this, we need like a bigger academy. For this, on-demand curated paths are going to help them like make the slight uptick that they really need to make.
Yeah, that's great. And we know that the perfect matches are very rare, right?
Mm,
So identifying transferable skills, but then being able to address those gaps with the upskilling is key. And it sounds like, your organization's doing a wonderful job. I know that we've got 3 minutes left, and we've got a couple more questions here. They're all pretty much touching on what we had talked about from the program development and so on and so forth. Um, Unfortunately, it is time to wrap up as we've got 3 minutes left. And so if we haven't addressed maybe some other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you, Nicole and Laura, so much for sharing your valuable insights into your successful programs from inception to the process, overcoming challenges, and such a critical role to get the stakeholder buy-in. That's huge. I think it's also really important for anyone here who has maybe tried but not succeeded in the past. Think of it as it's a new day, right?
yes.
We cannot let the fear of failure prevent us from starting and continuing. And I think you both framed it great, right? And also, it's not failure, it's feedback, right?
Mhm.
And so let's get
Yes.
the support that we need to get started. We are here to help support if anyone here on the call is like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't leave it up to the employee, and rethinking maybe their answer. Know that it's a two-prong approach, right? The employee absolutely has to take reins, but it's also the organization. And so we've got white papers, articles, if you need more support to help you get started. And with that, I will say thank you all for joining. We hope that you found this session informative and have some actionable tips and strategies to bring back to your organization. So goodbye to all.